Oh, sorry. I feel like I'm being caught off guard because the streaming thing was just going live, and it was spinning in a circle, but there we go. So here we are. I'm going to be recording chapter 23 of Lud-in-the-Mist. Lud-in-the-Mist, of course, is a very well-known fantasy story by Hope Mirrlees. It was written about 100 years ago. I'm Shiromia Serio, and I am a professional audiobook narrator. I've narrated over 300 books. I really should keep better track. Chapter 23: The Northern Firebox and Dead Men's Tales. That night, Hazel could not get to sleep. Perhaps this was due to having noticed something that afternoon that made her vaguely uneasy. The evenings were beginning to be chilly, and shortly before supper she had gone up to Master Nathaniel's room to light his fire. She found the widow and one of the maidservants there before her, and to her surprise they had brought down from the attic an old charcoal stove that had lain there unused for years. For Dorimare was a land of open fires, and stoves were practically unknown. The widow had brought the stove to the farm on her marriage, for, on her mother's side, she had belonged to a race from the far north. On Hazel's look of surprise, she had said casually, "The logs are dampish today, and I thought this would make our guest cozier." Now Hazel knew that the wood was not in the least damp. How could it be, as it had not rained for days? But that this should have made her uneasy was a sign of her deep, instinctive distrust of her grandfather's widow. Perhaps the strongest instinct in Hazel was that of hospitality, that all should be well, physically and morally, with the guests under the roof that she never forgot was hers, was a need in her much more pressing than any welfare of her own. Meanwhile, Master Nathaniel, somewhat puzzled by the outlandish apparatus that was warming his room, had got into bed. He did not immediately put out his candle. He wished to think. For being much given to reverie when he wanted to follow the sterner path of consecutive thought, he liked to have some tangible object on which to focus his eye, a visible goal, as it were, to keep his feet from straying down the shadowy paths that he so much preferred. Tonight it was the fine embossed ceiling on which he fixed his eye. The same ceiling at which Ranulph used to gaze when he had slept in this room. On a ground of a rich claret colour patterned with azure arabesques, knobs of a dull gold were embossed, and at the four corners clustered bunches of grapes and scarlet berries in stucco. And though time had dulled their colour and robbed the clusters of many of their berries, they remained, nevertheless, pretty and realistic objects. But in spite of the light, the focus, and his desire for hard thinking, Master Nathaniel found his thoughts drifting down the most fantastic paths. And besides, he was so drowsy, and his limbs felt so strangely heavy. The colours on the ceiling were getting all blurred. Sorry, I just really needed a sip there. And the old knobs were detaching themselves from their background and shining in space like suns, moons, and stars. Or was it like apples, the golden apples of the West? And now the claret-coloured background was turning into a red field, a field of red flowers from which leered Portunus, and among which wept Ranulph. But the straight road, which for the last few months had been the projection of his unknown, varied purpose, even through this confused landscape glimmered white. Yet it looked different from usual. Why, of course, it was the Milky Way. And then he knew no more. In the meantime, Hazel had been growing more and more restless, and though she scolded herself for foolishness, more and more anxious. Finally, she could stand it no more. I think I'll just creep up to the gentleman's door and listen if I can hear him snoring. Storing? That's not a word. I think I'll just creep up to the gentleman's door and listen if I can hear him snoring. She said to herself. Hazel believed that it was a masculine peculiarity not to be able to sleep without snoring. But though she kept her ear to the keyhole for a full 2 minutes, not a sound proceeded from Master Nathaniel's room. Then she softly opened the door. A lighted candle was guttering to its end, and her guest was lying, to all appearance, dead, whilst a suffocating atmosphere pervaded the room. Hazel felt almost sick with terror, but she flung open the casement window as wide as it would go, poured half the water from the ewer into the stove to extinguish its fire, and the remainder over Master Matt. Sorry. There goes my teleprompter again. And the remainder over Master Nathaniel himself. To her unspeakable relief, he opened his eyes, groaned, and muttered something inaudible. "Oh, sir, you're not dead, then?" almost sobbed Hazel. "I'll just go and fetch you a cup of cordial and get you some hartshorn." The hartshorn? Hartshorn. Okay, I need to look this one up because A, I know it's not hatchhorn because that's not a thing, but I should probably look it up. Hartshorn, okay, which is what I thought it was, but I'll just go and fetch you a cup of cordial and get you some hartshorn. When she returned with the 2 restoratives, she found Master Nathaniel sitting up in bed, and though he looked a little fuddled, his natural colour was creeping back, and the cordial restored him to almost his normal condition. When Hazel saw that he was really himself again, she sank down on the floor and spent with terror, began to sob bitterly. "Come, my child," said Master Nathaniel kindly. "There's nothing to cry about. I'm feeling as well as ever I did in my life. Though by the harvest of souls, I can't imagine what can have taken me. I never remember to have swooned before in all my born days." But Hazel would not be comforted. "That it should have happened here, in my house," she sobbed. "We who have always stood by the laws of hospitality. And not a young gentleman either. Oh, dearie me. Oh, dearie me." "Why do you blame yourself?" Sorry, I've got a hair on my nose. "Why do you blame to yourself, my child?" asked Master Nathaniel. "Your hospitality is in no sense to blame if, owing perhaps to recent fatigues and anxieties, I should have turned faint. No, it is not you that are the bad host, but I am the bad guest to have given so much trouble." But Hazel's sobs only grew wilder. "I didn't like her bringing in that firebox. No, I didn't. An evil, outlandish thing that is. That it should have happened under my roof. For it is my roof, and she'll not pass another night under it. And she sprang to her feet with clenched fists and blazing eyes. Master Nathaniel was becoming interested. "Are you alluding to your grandfather's widow?" he asked quietly. "Yes, I am," cried Hazel indignantly. "Oh, she's up to strange tricks, always. And none of her ways are those of honest farmers. No fennel over our doors, unholy fodder in our granary, and in her heart, thoughts as unholy. I saw the smile with which she looked at you at dinner." "Are you accusing this woman of actually having made an attempt on my life?" he asked slowly. But Hazel flinched before this point-blank question, and her only answer was to begin again to cry. For a few minutes, Master Nathaniel allowed her to do so unmolested, and then he said gently, "I think you have cried enough for tonight, my child. You have been kindness itself, but it is evident that I am not very welcome to your grandfather's widow, so I must not inflict myself longer upon her. But before I leave her roof, there is something I want to do, and I shall need your help." Then he told her who he was, and how he wanted to prove something against a certain enemy of his, and had come here hoping to find a missing clue. He paused and looked at her meditatively. "I think I ought to tell you, my child," he went on, "that if I can prove what I want, your grandmother may also be involved. Did you know she had once been tried for the murder of your grandfather?" "Yes," she faltered. "I've heard that there was a trial, but I thought she was proved innocent." "Yes, but there is such a thing as But there is such a thing as a miscarriage of justice. I believe that my teleprompter just jumped forward again. I believe that your grandfather was murdered, and that my enemy, whose name I don't care to mention till I have more to go upon, had a hand in the matter. And I have a shrewd suspicion that the widow was his accomplice. Under these circumstances, will you still be willing to help me?" Hazel first turned red. And then she turned white, and then her lower lip began to tremble. She disliked the widow, but had to admit... And her lower lip began to tremble. She disliked the widow, but had to admit that she had never been unkindly treated by her, and, though not her own kith and kin, she was the nearest approach to a relative she could remember. But on the other hand, Hazel belonged by tradition and breed to the votaries of the grim cult of the law. Crime must not go unpunished. Moreover, and here Hazel subscribed to a still more venerable code, one's own kith and kin must not go unavenged. But the very vehemence with which she longed to be rid of the widow's control had bred a curious, irrational sense of guilt with regard to her, and into the bargain she was terrified of her. Supposing this clue should lead to nothing, and the widow discover that they had been imagining. How, in that case, should she dare to face her, to go on living under the same roof with her? And yet, she was certain she had tried to murder their guest that night. How dared she? How dared she? Hazel clenched her fists, and in a little gasping voice said, "Yes, sir, I'll help you. Good, said Master Nathaniel briskly. I want to take old Portunus's advice and dig under that herm in the orchard this very night. Though, mind you, it's just as likely as not to prove any. Though, mind you, it's just as likely as not to prove nothing but the ravings of a crazy mind. Or else, it may concern some buried treasure or something else that has nothing to do with your grandfather's murder. But, in the case of our finding a valuable bit of evidence, we must have witnesses. And I think we should have the lawman of the district with us. Who is he? It's the Swan blacksmith, Peter Pease. Is there any servant you trust whom you could send for him? Someone more attached to you than to the widow? I can trust them all, and they all like me best, she answered. Good. Go and wake a servant and send him off at once for the blacksmith. Tell him not to bring him up to the orchard. Tell him not to bring him up to the house, but to take him straight to the orchard. We don't want to wake the widow before need be. And the servant can stay and help us with the job. The more witnesses, the better. Hazel felt as if she was in a strange, rather terrible dream. But she crept up to the attic and aroused one of the unmarried labourers, who, according to the old custom, slept in their master's house, and bade him ride into Swan and bring the blacksmith back with him on important business concerning the law. Hazel calculated that he should get to Swan and back in less than an hour, and she and Master Nathaniel crept out of the house to wait for them in the orchard, each provided with a spade. The moon was on the wane, but still sufficiently full to give a good light. She was indeed an orchard thief, for no fruit being left to rob, she had robbed the leaves of all their colour. Poor old moon, chuckled Master Nathaniel, who was now in the highest of spirits, always filching colours with which to paint her own pale face, and all in vain. But just look at your friend, Master Herm. He does look knowing. For in the moonlight, the old Herm had found his element, and under her rays his stone flickered and glimmered into living silver flesh, while his archaic smile had gained a new significance. "Excuse me, sir," said Hazel timidly, "but I couldn't help wondering if the gentleman you suspected was Dr. Lear." "What makes you think so?" asked Master Nathaniel sharply. "I don't quite know," faltered Hazel. "I just wondered." Before long they were joined by the labourer and the lawman, blacksmith. And the lawman blacksmith, a burly, jovial, red-haired rustic of about 50. "Good evening," cried Master Nathaniel briskly. "I'm Nathaniel Chanticleer." He was sure that the news of his deposition could not have yet had time to travel to Swan. "And if my business were not very pressing and secret, I would not, you may be sure, have had you roused from your bed at this ungodly hour. I have reason to think that something of great importance may be hidden under this herm, and I wanted you to be there to see that our proceedings are all in order." And he laughed genially. "And here's the guarantee that I'm no masquerader." And he removed his signet ring and held it out to the blacksmith. It was engraved with his well-known crest, and with 6 chevrons in token that 6 of his ancestors had been high seneschals of Dorimare. Both the blacksmith and the labourer were at first quite overwhelmed by learning his identity, but he pressed a spade into the hand of each and begged them to begin digging without further delay. For some time they toiled away in silence, and then one of the spades came against something hard. It proved to be a small iron box with a key attached to it. "Out with it! Out with it!" cried Master Nathaniel excitedly. "I wonder if it can..." That's not a word. "I wonder if it contains a halter. By the sun, moon, and stars, I wonder." But he was sobered by a glimpse of poor Hazel's scared face. "Forgive me, my child," he said gently. "My thirst for revenge has made me forget both decency and manners, and as like as not there will be nothing in it but a handful of Duke Aubrey's and like as not, there will be nothing in it but a handful of Duke Aubrey crowns, the nest egg of one of your ancestors." They unlocked the box and found that it contained nothing but a sealed parchment package, addressed thus: "To the first who finds me." "I think, Miss Hazel, it should be you who opens it. Don't you agree, Master Lawman?" said Master Nathaniel. So with trembling fingers, Hazel broke the seal, tore open the wrapper, and drew out a sheet of writing. By the light of the blacksmith's lanthorn they read as follows: "I, Jeremiah Gibberty, farmer and lawman of the district of Swan-on-the-Dapple, having ever been a merry man who loved his joke, do herein crack my last, this side of the Debatable Hills, in the hopes that it will not lie so long on the damp earth as to prove but a lame rocket when the time comes to fire it off. And this is my last joke, and may all who hear it hold their sides, and may the tears run down their cheeks. I, Jeremiah Gibberty, was wilfully murdered by my second wife, Clementina, daughter of Ralph Baldbritches, sailor and an outlandish woman from the far north. In the which crime she was aided by her lover, Christopher Pugwalker, a foreigner who called himself a herbalist. And I know by sundry itchings of my skin which torment me as I write, and by my spotted tongue, that I have been given what the folks who know them call death-berries, and they were boiled down to look like mulberry jelly, offered to me by my dear wife. Offered to be by my dear wife, and of which I ate in my innocence. And I bid him who finds this writing to search for a little lad by name Peter Pease, the son of a tipsy tinker. For this little lad, having an empty stomach and being greedy for pence, came to me but an hour ago with a basket full of these same deathberries, and asked me if I should like to buy them. And I, to test him, asked him if he thought there was a blight in my orchard that I should be so hard put to it for fruit. And he said he thought we must like them up at Gibberty's, for he had seen the gentleman who lived with us. And he said he thought we must like them up at Gibberty's, for he had seen the gentleman who lived with us, Christopher Pugwalker, but a week since, gathering them. And if Christopher Pugwalker should leave these parts, then let the law search for a dumpy fellow with nut-brown hair, a pug nose freckled like a robin's egg, and one eye brown, the other blue. And in order that my last joke may be a well-built one, I have tested the berries I bought from the little lad, though it wrung my heart to do so, on one of the rabbits of a certain little maid by name Marjorie Beach, the daughter of my carter. And I have done so because she, being 7 years old and a healthy lass, runs a good chance of still being this. Runs a good chance of being still this side of the hills when someone digs up this buried jest. And if she be alive, she will not have forgotten how one of her rabbits took to scratching itself, and how its tongue was spotted like a snake, and how she found it lying dead. And I humbly beg her pardon for having played such a cruel trick on a little maid. And I ask my heirs, if so be any of them still alive, to send her a fine buck rabbit, a ham and 10 gold pieces. And though I am lawman and could put them under arrest before I die, yet for a time I hold my hand, partly because I have been a hunter all my life, and as the hare and deer are given their chance to escape, sure. Sure shall we? No. So shall they have theirs, and partly because I should like to be very far on my wanderings down the Milky Way before Clementina mounts Duke Aubrey's wooden horse, because I think the sound of her strangling would hurt my ears, and last of all, because I'm very weary. And here I sign my name for the last time. Okay. Bum, bum, bum. Oh, damn it. So that is the end of chapter 23. So Nat finally has his confession, which is brilliant. And in just a moment, I am going to be moving on to chapter 24 to find out what Nat is going to do with that. I guess it's not really, is it a confession? It's not a confession of guilt, but it's evidence. So bear with me while I just start the next chapter. Chapter 24. Belling the Cat. When they had finished reading, Hazel burst into hysterical sobs, crying alternately, "Poor grandfather!" and "Will they hang her for it?" Master Nathaniel soothed her as best he could, and when she had dried her eyes, she said, "Poor Marjorie Beach. She must have that ham and that buck rabbit." "She's still alive, then?" asked Master Nathaniel eagerly. Hazel nodded. "She is poor and still a maid, and lives in Swan." "And what about Peter Pease, the tinker's smart little lad? Is there nothing for him, Miss Hazel?" Wrong person speaking. And what about Peter Pease, the tinker's smart little lad? Is there nothing for him, Miss Hazel? Cried the blacksmith with a twinkle. Hazel stared at him in bewilderment, and Master Nathaniel cried gleefully, Why, it's the same name, by the harvest of souls! Were you then the little chap who saw Pugwalker picking the berries? And Hazel said in slow amazement, You were the little boy who spoke to my grandfather that night. I never thought that I'd begun so humbly, eh? Yes, I was the son of a tinker, or, as they like to be called, of a whitesmith, and now I'm a blacksmith, and as white is better than black, I suppose I've come down in the world. And he winked merrily. That's a weird line, but I'm going to keep it in. And you remember the circumstances alluded to by the late farmer? Asked Master Nathaniel eagerly. That I do, my lord seneschal, as well if they had happened yesterday. I won't easily forget the farmer's face that night when I offered him my basketful. But though the deathberries are rare enough, I found them in those days commoner to pick up than I know that it's a penny, but I don't know what it is when it's a pence. Halfpence? I'm just looking something up. I'm not finding what I want. What I need. It's a halfpenny. Oh, here we go. Okay, there's no... I'm going to just use halfpenny. Oh, hang on a sec. Halfpence. Halfpence? Halfpence. But though the deathberries are rare enough, I found them in those days commoner to pick up than halfpence. And I won't easily forget Master Pugwalker's face either, while he was plucking them. And little did he know there was a squirrel watching him with a good Dorimare tongue in his head. Have you ever seen him since? The blacksmith winked. Come, come, cried Master Nathaniel impatiently. Have you seen him since? This is no time for beating about the bush. Well, perhaps I have, said the blacksmith slowly, trotting about Swan as brisk and as pleased with himself as a fox with a goose in his mouth, and I've often wondered whether it was my duty as lawman to speak out, but after all it was very long ago. And his life seemed to be of better value than his death, for he was a wonderfully clever doctor and did a powerful lot of good. It was Dr. Lear, then? Asked Hazel in a low voice, and the blacksmith winked. Well, I think we should be getting back to the house, said Master Nathaniel. There's still some business before us. And, lowering his voice, he added, Not very pleasant business, I fear. I suppose your honour means belling the cat, said the blacksmith, adding with a rueful laugh. I can't imagine a nastier job. She's a cat with claws. As they walked up to the house, the labourer whispered to Hazel, Please, missy, does it mean that the mistress killed her husband? They always say so in the village, but— Don't, Ben, don't! I can't bear talking about it, cried Hazel with a shudder. And when they reached the house, she ran up to her own bedroom and locked herself in. Ben was dispatched to get a stout coil of rope, and Master Nathaniel and the blacksmith, whom the recent excitement had made hungry, began to forage around for something— to eat. began to forage around for something to eat. Suddenly, a voice at the door said, "And what, may I ask, are you looking for in my larder, gentlemen?" It was the widow. First, she scrutinized Master Nathaniel, a little pale and hollow-eyed, perhaps, but alive and kicking for all that. Then her eyes travelled to Peter Pease. At that moment, Ben entered with the rope, and Master Nathaniel nudged the lawman, who, clearing his throat, cried in the expressionless falsetto of the law, "Clementina Gibbety, in the name of the county of Dorimare, and to the end that the dead, the living, and those not yet born may rest quietly in their graves, their bed, and the womb, I arrest you for the murder of your late husband, Jeremiah. I arrest you for the murder of your late husband, Jeremiah Gibbety." She turned deadly pale, and, for a few seconds, stood glaring at him in deadly silence. Then she gave a scornful laugh. "What new joke of yours is this, Peter Pease? I was accused of this before, as you know well, and acquitted with the judge's compliments, and as good as an apology. Law business must be very slack and swan that you've nothing better to do than to come and frighten a poor woman in her own house with old, spiteful tales that were silenced once and for all nearly 40 years ago. My late husband died quietly in his bed, and I only hope you may have as peaceful an end. And you must know very little of the law, Peter Pease, if you don't know that a person can't be tried twice for the same crime." Then Master Nathaniel stepped forward. "You were tried before," he said quietly, "for poisoning your husband with the sap of osiers. This time it will be for poisoning him with the berries of merciful death. Tonight the dead have found their tongues." She gave a wild shriek which reached upstairs to Hazel's room and caused her to spring into bed and pull the blankets over her ears as if it had been a thunderstorm. Master Nathaniel signed to Ben, who, grinning from ear to ear, as is the way of rustics when witnessing a painful and embarrassing scene, came up to his mistress with the coil of rope. But to bind her he needed the aid of both the blacksmith and Master Nathaniel, for, like a veritable wild cat, she struggled and scratched and it just sounded like I didn't say the whole word. I guess I did, but there we go. Too late now. She struggled and scratched and bit. When her arms were tightly bound, Master Nathaniel said, "And now I will read you the words of the dead." She was, for the time, worn out by her struggles, and her only answer was an insolent stare, and he produced the farmer's document and read it through to her. "And now," he said, eyeing her curiously, "shall I tell you who gave me the clue without which I should never have found that letter? It was a certain old man whom I think you know, by name Portunus." Her face turned as pale as death, and in a low voice of horror she cried, "Long ago I guessed who he was, and feared that he might prove my undoing." Then her voice grew shrill with terror, and her eyes became fixed as if seeing something. And her eyes became fixed as if seeing some hideous vision. "The silent people!" she screamed. "The dumb who speak, the bound who strike. I cherished and fed old Portunus like a tame bird. But what do the dead know of kindness?" "If old Portunus is whom you take him to be, I fail to see. If old Portunus is he whom you take him to be, I fail to see that he has much cause for gratitude," said Master Nathaniel dryly. "Well, he has taken his revenge on you, and your accomplice." "My accomplice?" "Aye, on Endymion Lear." "Oh, Lear!" and she laughed scornfully. "It was a greater than It was a greater than Endymion Lear who ordered the death of Farmer Gibbety." "Indeed, yes, one who cares not for good and evil and sows his commands like grain." "Who do you mean?" Again she laughed scornfully. "Not one whom I would name to you. But set your mind at rest. He cannot be summoned in a court of law." She gave him a searching look and said abruptly, "Who are you?" "My name is Nathaniel Chanticleer." "I thought as much," she cried triumphantly. "I wasn't sure, but I thought I'd take no risks. However, you seem to bear a charmed life. I suppose you are alluding to your kind thought for my comfort, putting that nice little putting that nice little death box in my room to keep me warm, eh?" "Putting that nice little death box in my room to keep me warm, eh?" "Yes, that's it," she answered brazenly. Then a look of indescribable malice came into her face, and with an evil smile she said, "You see, you gave yourself away without knowing it at dinner." "Indeed, and how? And how, may I ask?" At first she did not answer, but eyed him gloatingly as a cat might eye a mouse. And then she said slowly, "It was that pack of lies you told me about the doings of the lads at Moongrass. Your son isn't at Moongrass, nor ever has he been, nor ever will be." "What do you mean?" he cried hoarsely. "Mean?" she said with a shrill, triumphant She said with a shrill, triumphant laugh. She said with a shrill. She said with a shrill, triumphant laugh. "I mean this. On the night of the 31st of October, when the silent people are abroad, he heard Duke Aubrey's summons and followed it across the hills." "Woman, what, what, speak, or—" And the veins in Master Nathaniel's temples were swelling, and a fire seemed to have been lighted in his brain. Her laughter redoubled. "You'll never see your son again," she jeered. Young Ranulph Chanticleer has gone to the land whence none returns." Not for a moment did he doubt the truth of her words. Before his inward eye there flashed the picture he had seen in the pattern on the ceiling just before losing consciousness. Ranulph weeping among the fields of gillyflowers. A horror of impotent tenderness swept over him, while, with the surface of his mind, he supposed that this was it, springing out at him at last. And parallel with the agony, and in no way mitigating it, was a sense of relief, the relaxing of tension when one can say, "Well, that has come at last." He turned a dull eye on the widow and said, a little thickly, "The land from which no one returns. But I can go there too." "Follow him across the hills?" she cried scornfully. "No, you are not made of that sort of stuff." He beckoned to Peter Pease, and they went out together to the front of the house. The cocks were crowing, and there was a feeling of dawn in the air. "I want my horse," he said dully. "And can you find Miss Hazel for me?" But as he spoke, she joined them, pale and wild-eyed. "From my room I heard you coming out," she said. Is it over?" Master Nathaniel nodded, and then, in a quiet voice, emptied of all emotion, he told her what he had just learned from the widow. He told her what he had just learned from the widow. She went still paler than before, and her eyes filled with tears. Then, turning to Peter Pease, he said, "You will immediately get out a warrant for the apprehension of Endymion Mere and send it into Lud to the new mayor, Master Polydore Vigil. And you, Miss Hazel, you'd better leave this place at once. You'll have to be plaintiff in the trial. Go to your aunt, Mistress Ivy Peppercorn, who keeps the village shop at Moth Green. And remember, you must say nothing whatever about the part I've played in this business. That is essential. I'm not popular at present in Lud. And now, would you kindly order my horse saddled and brought round?" There was something so colourless, so dead in his voice that both Hazel and the smith stood for a few seconds in awed and sympathetic silence. And then Hazel went off slowly to order his horse. You didn't mean what you said to the widow, sir, about going yonder?" asked Mr. Oh, I don't know what happened there. Okay. Asked Peter Pease in an awed voice. Suddenly the fire was rekindled in Master Nathaniel's eyes, and he cried fiercely, "Aye, yonder and beyond yonder, if need be, till I find my son." It did not take long for his horse to be saddled and led to the door. "Goodbye, my child," he said to Hazel, taking her hand, and then he added with a smile, "You dragged me back last night from the Milky Way, and now I am going by the earthly one." She and Peter stood watching him, riding along the valley towards the Debatable Hills, till he and his horse were just a speck in the distance. "Well, well," said Peter Pease, "I warrant it'll be the first time in the history of Dorimare that a man has loved his son well enough to follow him yonder." All right, that is the end of chapter 24 of Lud-in-the-Mist. Thank you so much for watching. Yeah, you can find the actual audio book will be probably up for sale February or March-ish. I'll definitely be putting links in when it actually goes live for sale. Anyway, join me tomorrow about the same time, and I will be doing the next chapters of Lud-in-the-Mist. Bye for now.